hang out straight away. So, or whatever that time is for you. Okay, I'll throw it open.
Well, I do have a question.
Yeah.
I touched upon it a little bit the other day.
Yeah.
Ezekiel, this, I was on an encounter with a friend on an assignment, and we were given a box, and we knew it had some blueprints and whatnot to deliver to a group of graduate students. It turned out to be technology that God wanted to release into the earth realm, and He used us as vessels to carry it.
Yeah.
While I was there, I felt the need to decree protection. So I did. And all of a sudden, this elder appeared with this ox that was standing like a man. It was standing like a man. And, you know, I realized I had met the same ox and man, and it was Ezekiel. I had met him 5 years ago and didn't know who he was and never knew who he was. And it just, the timing of that was crazy. But I'm trying to figure out, what does he have to do with protection? Why,
Yeah.
Once you're out of it, you come out with a lot of questions,
Yeah, sure.
It freaked me out because, well, the first time I met him was almost 5 years ago, and I was sitting talking with him and this ox, and I was noticing this ox who was serving us because we were breaking bread. And he was serving us, and then I freaked out because I saw the hooked feet and all the thoughts of, all the images that we get. I mean, it was enough to pull me out of the encounter, but not before Ezekiel stroked my face and told me that my grandchild was coming. 2 weeks later, my grandchild, I was told that I was having a grandchild. Yeah. So that confirmed the encounter. But I was so freaked out, it took the Lord to tell me to check the description of the angels with the hoof feet and the hoof feet and whatever. But I'm really, again, unsettled. It's so, why Ezekiel when I ask for protection for these guys? Why this ox? I don't know. I have no answer. I'm getting no answer. I'm just
okay. Well, I guess some of it, when you begin to look at the symbolic nature of things. Ezekiel as a physical person, wasn't an ox, but he was a priest in a sense, a prophet, and therefore he carried the weight of the word of God.
No, it was Ezekiel and an ox standing with him.
So there's both of them together. But I think when you think of the ox as in the lion, ox, eagle, man, the aspect of the ox carries the prophetic weight of God's word. And Ezekiel was definitely a prophet who unleashed all sorts of revelation concerning, the Merkaba of God, and the four faces of God, and the wheels within wheels within wheels. So much that came out of Ezekiel, which was very, very symbolic and often quite cryptic. And when you get sort of a prophet and the symbol of a prophet coming together, and we're not talking about with the ox, sort of Ephesians 4 prophets or prophecy like that. We're talking of the oracles of God. What is the oracle of God? The eternal purposes of God. And if you think of the word of God and God's provision and God's protection being around you, what is going to protect us? God himself, being our provision, being our protector, being our banner of victory, the name of the compound names of the covenant names of God. And the ox carries the weight of that to breathe that over us so that we stand in, and an ox stands firm in the position of carrying the weight of the word. So, it may well be just a sense of that, the God's encouraging you, stand firm. You don't need to be shaken or rocked by circumstances, you can stand firm on my word. Yeah, stand firm in that position of not being wavering between two opinions or not being intimidated by anybody else, but standing firm. And it's almost like, here's one of the cloud of witnesses, and here's a representation of one of the four faces of God, standing in agreement, forming an ark to open up that realm of protection around you. So you stand in the protection of the agreement that came between the ox and Ezekiel as one of the cloud of witnesses. You know, because when there's two, it's always because there's an ark of an agreement. And what is that agreement for? In this case, that you would stand in the protection of God's word. You know.
Yeah, I was asking of the the graduate students of what we were giving them. I said, I need to decree protection over them. And I said he just showed up.
Yeah, but in a sense, then is the protection over them when they stand in the place of the words that you were delivering to them, the scrolls, the blueprints, because in essence, you could see that the ox and Ezekiel coming together, forming that ark, and you're saying, we want this word protected, or we want the people who this word is going to go to protected, then, it's standing firm in that position where the portal opens or the manifestation of that comes, that people can stand in. And I think, anyone who's given a mandate, you obviously want to stand in the circle of the government that you've been given, or the authority you've been given, or the place. You don't want to step outside of it. And, maybe that's just, what God was trying to convey is, there is a manifestation of that's coming for those people to stand in the good of the word that's been brought to them, or the blueprint that's been given, or the mandate that you carried for them. But they've got to walk into it. They've got to walk into it, and they've got to effectively, in walking into it, they have to stand firm in it. You can't step outside or waver, outside of that which God is giving you. But these things are quite symbolic, and there's probably multiple layers of meaning that could have, both for you and for them.
It really frustrates me, because I met this ox and the elder, or this Ezekiel, almost 5 years ago. Had no clue who he was. I had asked, and I guess I wasn't diligent enough to know. I just said, okay, well, whatever. Everything we talked about is a sure word, because he gave me the sure word of my grandchild. And then, I see him again, and I hear it's Ezekiel, and I'm like, well, how come you didn't tell me this 5 years ago, Lord? It's
well, shows you're a forerunner of what's happening. So
it can be frustrating, just the not knowing. I don't have to know. I have no need to know, but I like to know.
Well, that's where the rubber comes. It's the road, isn't it? I mean, it's like, and I think sometimes God tests that so we don't get frustrated, or if we do get frustrated, we then have to come back to a place of rest where, what's the important part of the engagement? What happened, or what the end result of it, or what was happening while you were having it? And if you delivered the blueprints as you were instructed, I guess that was what God asked you to do. And if, as you outworked that, you fulfilled that purpose. And then, if you're asking for protection and these two show up, you've got to, I guess, trust and believe that that's a response to what you were calling for. And sometimes, okay, what do you do with that? If God is wanting you to do something with that, that's great. But if he sent those two as a representation of the prophetic and the oracles of God, then they will do what they need to do. We just let them get on with it, you know, because they've already responded and they've come. So yeah, I think there's a lot of things when symbolism is involved, and where we sometimes get caught up in that symbolism. I've learned to rest nowadays, and I don't tend to dig into symbolism too much, because if I've done something or something's occurred, then I'm wanting to live out of that experience and in my spirit, not necessarily in my mind. So, you know, but I know it's nice to know things, but sometimes you just got to trust if God isn't telling you, then we don't want to tell you. And that's, you know, I have to face that a lot, where, you know, I have all sorts of things go on, and, you know, I don't get to understand it or know all of it. And I've really got to the point where I try not to figure it out or understand it, because then I tend to lean to what I've understood rather than to what I've received. And the experience is imparted something to me that I've received spiritually. And if I try and figure it out mentally, then I'm going to lean to what I think it is, rather than what it might actually be from God. And if he wants me to know, then he can tell me, and he'll tell you, you know. And I think if you ask, you know, Paul asked a few times, you know, and it was like, no, in the end, it was like, oh, is my grace sufficient for you? Basically, are you going to trust me, you know, or do you want to know, you know, you know, and that's, you know, the place of rest. I've been there, done it. You know, I got the hat and the t-shirt in that whole thing, and that was really what really made a huge difference in my life when I was separated from that. You know, when the whole thing was separated, soul and spirit separated, reintegrated, engage the dark cloud, give up needing to know. That whole dimension of it really changed my ability to function, you know, in the realms of heaven and on earth at the same time. It was a key part of my life, and I had to embrace, you know, my need to know, and my need to understand, and my need to get my identity from my knowing, rather than flow out of who I am and then outwork it. And as soon as I was free, you know, from it, God was free to unload all sorts of experience and engagement and revelation, whereas previously he was holding that back because I wasn't in the right place to receive it, because I would have used it inappropriately. Not that I knew I was, but I was still using it to validate myself, and my soul was in charge, needing to be in on what was going on. And so all of my heavenly encounters were soul and spirit in that realm. And as soon as I didn't need my soul to be in that realm, my spirit could stay there. Up until that point, I kept stepping in and stepping out. Now, you know, from that point, I didn't need to step back out. I can continuously be in that realm, in the spirit, and my spirit and soul be totally instantly connected. So everything can flow from that realm to this realm without having to step in, step out, and go through all that process anymore, you know. And so I can spend much more time engaged in the relational that flows into the responsibility, and outwork that in my positions in the realms of heaven, you know. And over a period of time, you know, I found, you know, there was an ongoing process to bring me into the fullness of, you know, my sonship and who I really am, which was not to be limited by one-dimensional understanding and linearity in both in my thinking and in my operating. And, you know, until I got my mind connected and some of it deconstructed from the frameworks that were limiting me, I couldn't be multidimensionally operating. I was only operating in heaven, where I was all the time, but only linearly. So eventually I would go to my mountain, having gone to the heart of God, or gone to, the four faces of God and the ark, and got a mandate and got a blueprint and all those things, be as a living sacrifice on the altar and go through the whole process. Eventually sitting on my mountain, or being in a court, or doing something, that I was authorized to do, and framing my day from that place, and then trying to live out from that place. Whereas when I was then free to be everywhere at once, because I'm in him and he's omnipresent, therefore I can be omnipresent, wherever and that means I'm not everywhere, but it means I can be anywhere I need to be. And therefore now I'm in the heart of God, in outside of time and space, connecting with the always now. I'm standing, in the four faces of God, and I'm out in the name of God. I'm on my own mountain. I'm also sat in a chancellor's court. I'm on the altar as a continual living sacrifice, and any other dimensions and realms that I need to be in, I can be in all at the same time. Now that increases your capacity no end, and it's increased my capacity to be able to enjoy the presence of God without having to go through that linear process every day. And it's so liberating to just be. I can just be, and everything just comes out of being. And I don't have to think about, well, what am I doing for my mountain? Well, my spirit is functioning there and doing everything that I've learned to do. So decreeing and declaring and calling forth and framing and creating and releasing and assigning angels. And if I focus my soul to go and engage there, then I actively participate in what's going on. But I don't need to do that, and unless I really feel that's what I need to do, and sometimes when you go and make a law, or you go and make some legislation in a court of kings, it's very useful to actually have the piece of legislation written out. And so when I do something like that, often it's a cognitive process. And I go and my soul and spirit engage, and I write out and journal what I'm doing and what I'm seeing and what I'm receiving. And then I have it. But most of the time, I'm just flowing from the place in the spirit, or the dimensions in the spirit. And I'm flowing in a sense, I'm flowing connected soul and spirit. But I don't need to cognitively understand what's going on to flow from that. And whenever I tried to cognitively understanding it, outside of time and space, in the heart and mind of God, in what was before everything was, I can't fathom it anyway, unless God speaks to me directly and opens revelation up. I just receive it. And almost like by being in the atmosphere, I absorb it. I absorb the heart of God. I absorb the desire of God's outworking his heart into the what is, and then I'm connected to what is. And so I'm always flowing in what is from what was. And then what will be can always come out of me being in all those places. So there isn't a linearity with it that if I went back into, what we call eternity outside of time and space, if I go back into that place and I receive something, and then I step out of that place, and then I go into like the four faces of God, or I go to my mountain, then I'm only able to flow in what I receive while I was there. But if I'm continually there, I can always respond to the now of God, in which he's responding to everyone's now in the whole of existence, if you like, because there isn't limited by a time-space continuum. Well, that is hugely liberating and much more effective and efficient in flowing, and when I first began to be in these multiple places at once, it was like a whole load of streams all came together into a big river, and there was a huge increase in flow. And each time before, it was like one stream was flowing at a time, because I had to go and that stream would flow, and then the next one, and then the next one, until eventually, I would end up in the place that I was going to govern from or rule from. And the flow was significantly increased because all these streams flow together, and they continually are like that. If I'm on the altar as a living sacrifice, then anything God wants to do by bringing fire from the altar or coals from the altar to touch a particular area of my life that's going to help me to facilitate something is continually going on. Not just as in well, I'm going to go and do this now. It's a continual process. No, but sometimes I go and engage that process. I can remember I was in China probably a few weeks ago, a month or so ago, and I woke up 3 o'clock in the morning, wide awake, and being wide awake, I immediately thought about the altar, and I just shifted my focus to the altar, and I started to think about my family lines, all 4 of my family lines, and I started to think about a very specific issue that I knew was in one of those family lines, but it turns out was in all of them. So I specifically asked for a coal from the altar to be put onto my life in relation to anything that's in my life that's affecting that family line. And I stood in identification for those family lines, all 4 of them, in that coal, that fire, would purify and refine. And I specifically chose to forgive those that were in my family line and release them to the fire of that altar. And I didn't know what I was going to do next. I just felt compelled to do that and go. So I did. And then immediately I thought, wow, now I have authority in this area to go and engage my family line. So then I went to Satan's trophy room by Wisdom's Heights, and I went through the fiery tunnel thing and into Satan's trophy room, and then through the door into the fire where my family lines were standing. And I went and preached with more boldness than I'd ever done in any occasion in my life, I think, to the people who were there of my family lines in that specific area, just decreeing that they were free from guilt, shame, and condemnation, that they were free from the bondage that these issues had created in them, in our generational lines. And I really proclaimed it with boldness, and more people responded than any other time that I'd ever been there. And they followed me out through the fiery tunnel, got up to the fiery sword, bowed their knee, confessed that Jesus was Lord, and walked through the door in and out through into wherever they went to be part of the cloud of witnesses, I guess. So, that was a very specific occasion where I engaged and where I activated that. But that process is going on all the time. And I'm benefiting from that all the time, even though I'm not always cognitively aware of it, because I'm continually there and continually a living sacrifice. I don't want to be a living sacrifice. I step into heaven, I'm a living sacrifice, and then I forget it, and then I'm not until the next time I do it. I just want to be a continual living sacrifice. Therefore, God can continually purify me. He can continually do anything he wants to bring me into a place of greater authority or holiness or purity of my heart. I'm just cooperating all the time. And sometimes I get to actually know, and a lot of the times I just go with the flow. That's an increase that comes from my holiness, from and I'm not talking about me being good, I'm just talking about me being in alignment with who God says I am. So it's quite a interesting process, that when I was set free from not needing to know everything, then what I actually know in my spirit has increased exponentially, and then what flows through to my soul also has had a huge increase in the level of that flow. It's like Before there was a trickle, you know, or an ankle deep flow. Now it increased to knee deep and waist deep, and I want it to increase until it's totally, you know, flowing like a river in flood, and I'm totally out of my depths and completely just taken along with the life that goes as it flows through me, because that life can then flow and touch others through me. But I couldn't do it until the two processes were the dark cloud that separated and reintegrated my soul and spirit, and then the deconstruction of my mind and the renewal of my mind to connect to the ability to have non-linear operating, and not to think linearly anymore in that way. So yeah, interesting process that took place, but I feel that I'm benefiting greatly from it, and continuing to do so. So anyway, there we go. So anyone else got something they want to share or talk about?
So that's why when I go into the realms of heaven, I can kind of leave one place. I'm echoing, distracting. I leave one place, and it's just like I recognize, okay, I'm leaving me over there, but I need to do this now. I feel like I'm leaving parts here, and then I go do something else. And it's just like, I know I'm still there.
Yeah, I'm there in multiple places, just needing what I need to do all the time. Sometimes, I go to a place and engage it, and most of the time I don't. I just do it without needing to be there at all in my cognitive senses. But, I think it's just we all do things differently, and we all have different ways of doing it. But I think that's what it is. You can be in one place, and then what you're doing is not going to another place, but staying there, but you are going to another place. I think ultimately that progresses into being in multiple places and living multi-dimensionally, spiritually speaking. And, who knows whether that becomes something that we do, spirit, soul, and body, and being in two places at once by location, or multiple places at once here. Well, that would certainly increase the capacity of what we're doing on Earth, wouldn't it? If we, it's that, what was the film? Duplicity or something, wasn't it? I think it was where a guy basically was multiple versions of himself all around doing everything to keep everything going, but we have to do it from a place of rest, not out of a place of striving or a place of tension, but rest. And if I'm at rest, then I think I can flow much better. Okay. All right. Anything else anyone wants to talk about? Share.
I wanted to share an experience I had about identity. You mentioned identity a couple of times while you were speaking there. And I remember going and dealing with my AutoZone on a certain day. And I kept seeing pictures of myself in a stance, like Dances with Wolves. That lady's name was Standing with Fists, was her Indian name. And it just seemed like I was always defending myself, and it had to do with family issues and the identity of being the youngest of 12. But it's just like I'm the one that's different. I am marching to a different drummer than the entire family. And it's very difficult at times to walk that walk and stand firm. And when I was dealing with this AutoZone that one day, it just seemed like I kept having to defend myself. I was seeing scenes where I was being cornered, and it's just like fighting for my voice, fighting for my identity. And it had to do with the family. And then all of a sudden, the revelation came to me that I was fighting for the 12th child birthright, and which was Benjamin. And as I did study on that, Benjamin was named by his father, and my name means nobility. And I remember a few years ago, I had a dream where my freedom came from my name. And so I had changed it from Pat to Patricia. And at that same time, there were at least 2 or 3 other Pats that were doing the same thing. And the Lord was revealing our status in the body of Christ, who we really are. We are nobility. And so I ended up, well, Benjamin was also given 5 times the blessings that the siblings had. So I ended up asking Papa to pray the blessing of the 12th child over me, to bring that into my life, so I no longer have to fight for my identity and my voice. I remember going to the restroom that later in the night, and the time was 4:44. So again, we have this 12 going on. And so there was something to do with that 12th child birthright that I really had to fight for.
How's that made you feel now? How's that worked out in terms of your actual experience?
I think some of it will be revealed as I take this trip back to the family. But yeah.
Yeah, so you're going back into the lion's den, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, but just the communication since then, it was just like I'm coming from a more sure place, I feel, even though the old thought patterns and mind patterns try to be there. It's just like, no, we're going to establish new mindsets about this. You know, we're not going to travel down those roads anymore. We're going to stand in what I believe that I received from my father.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, no, that's excellent. You know, it's an excellent testimony. And I think, you know, the key there is what you said, I received from my father. Yeah, that is where we get our identity. We get it from the Father. And it's only in sonship that we can actually know who we are, and we can only be in sonship when we're in relationship with the Father. And it's the Father who gives us a new name, if you like. He restores that which, you know, was in his heart in eternity, and which probably got lost in the losing of our identity by being in Adam. And now we're in Christ, we get re-access back to that. And it's like a new name, although it's not new from God's perspective. It's just a reaffirmation of who we always were from his perspective, but what we probably lost sight of from our own situations that we brought up with, and, you know, circumstances that we end up in, and all those type of things. You know, I think it's really, really key to see the identity that just flows out of the Father's heart when we engage him. And it's great when you get a specific thing like that, which is like the 12th child, which is great, isn't it? You know, to see multiplied blessings and, you know, a son of promise in that sense. So, yeah, awesome. Okay. Anyone else got anything?
I've got something else if no one else is going to speak.
Okay, go on then.
It was something we discussed yesterday, and I was just mulling over things this morning, sipping my cup of tea. So my thing is, if the energy source from which everything is created is love, thing has the opportunity to return back to love. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, because that's God's desire. Yeah, that we would come back into a relationship that birthed us. You know, we were birthed in his heart of love out of the desire for him to share the love of Father, Son, and Spirit, the circle of the dance, the many descriptions of it, which describe the relationship that Father, Son, and Spirit always had. And they've invited us into that circle to experience love. And we were birthed in that place out of the thoughts of God's heart. And we can return there and experience the nature of who we are and our identity in that place of love. So definitely, yeah, I would say.
But it's not limited to humans, is my point. Because he created all.
Yeah, because if you think of God reconciled the cosmos to himself, then no, I don't think it is limited to humans. And I know people have all sorts of views. Well, other beings can't be restored because Jesus died and his DNA was human, therefore he only died for humans, which, you know, that's an opinion. But it says he reconciled the whole cosmos, which means everything. And it also says that that things in heaven, on earth, and under the earth will be restored. So I don't think that limits anything or can put a limit. How can you put a limit on love? I don't think God puts a limit on love. You know, God cannot hold anything outside of love towards somebody. He cannot be in unforgiveness towards anybody. I mean, look at Jesus on the cross. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they're doing. I mean, Jesus can't give us the parable of the unforgiving servant in Matthew 18 and say, if you don't forgive for your heart, then you'll be handed over to the torturers, and do that himself. It would be hypocritical, and he's certainly not a hypocrite. You know, he has total integrity. So what he's asking us to do is a reflection of his own heart and his own view towards people and towards the creation that he has created. And if the whole of creation is in bondage, waiting for the freedom of the glory of the children of God and waiting for the revealing of the sons of God, that actually is the whole creation. It's not just a bit of it. It's not just the physical realm. It's the spiritual realm as well. So, yeah, I think all limitations need to be removed from our thinking when it comes to the power and the reach of God's love, you know, and nothing can separate us from the love of God. And if God has reconciled the whole cosmos, then nothing can separate the cosmos from the love of God. It would be my reading on that perspective. So definitely. Now, how it works, I don't know. You know, I have not personally engaged in anything which has been connected to anything outside of my own family line, and you know, people who are either living or in one place or living in another place. So I've not got a personal experience of that. But when we judge angels, and it says we will judge angels, and I know Pamela's done some stuff on judging angels as in rewards and giving thanks to them and acknowledging them, which I think is an absolute valid expression of that. But actually, what judgment are we going to make? And on what evidence are we going to make the judgment? Because that's the verdict that we're going to give. Are we going to do that on the basis of what Jesus did on the cross in reconciling the whole cosmos to himself? If so, it says that he doesn't hold anyone's sins against them. Is that just human sins? Or is that just sin in complete general? What does it mean? If the whole cosmos is reconciled and he doesn't hold sin against anyone or anything effectively, then our verdict would be based on that, not on what we might think of, well, you know, they've done terrible things, or terrible things have happened, and therefore we need to be coming from that place. I think our whole thinking changes once we start thinking in line with the love of God. And the more experience of God's love we have, the more breadth and depth and height and width of that love that we encounter. I shared, I think yesterday, where, you know, I had this experience of being under the waterfall in the garden of God and just being overwhelmed by the abundance and lavishness of the love of God, overwhelmed by it. And last night I was meeting with a small group here, and we were talking about some things, and then we did an engagement where we went to that waterfall, and so everyone went back there. I went back there myself, and this time I'm under the waterfall, and it's like the waterfall is made up of just every shade and color and frequency of light that there can be. Just amazing. First, all the colors of the rainbow streamed down, and then they all merged into every color that could be, every shade, every hue, you know, every possible combination. And I'm just under it, just like, wow. And then it was like, what it imparted was, and every color is to reach everything that's been created. You know, whether that be, you know, people from our perspective, when we see, you know, different colors, different races, different families, different tongues, you know, and it was like, and I saw, you know, the opposites being reached, you know, the victims and the perpetrators, and the abusers and the abused. And it was just like, whoa, there is nothing that's outside of the scope of this love. That's what, and I'm under it. Just, it was an intense experience. I mean, even more intense than the one I'd had a couple of days before. And because all of a sudden it was just opened up the possibilities of what this love would accomplish, and how there are no boundaries and no limitations. You know, and when you know, Song of Solomon 8, you know, love that is stronger than death, jealousy as severe as the grave. You know, many waters cannot quench this love. You know, and I think, wow. And it was like another level of expansion into this love is going to engage and restore the cosmos. You know, it is, you know, and I felt it intensely, and I felt it for like every person, for every sin, for everything, every wrong thought, everything, that the love of God was overcoming it and would reach people. It won't relent. But I'm not saying that love cannot be resisted if people choose to, but God won't relent, I believe, until they choose not to, or he's not going to ever give up on anybody or anything. You know, and that for me is, you know, the thing of that. Okay, well, in terms of turning the other cheek and judging with right and wrong, basically, I believe that parables are stories which have a meaning, and because we don't live in a Hebrew culture, we often miss most of the meanings that Jesus was intending through parables. And so a lot of those parables about turning the other cheek and giving your coat, if someone asks for give him your other one, does that mean that you have to go and give all your stuff away to a thief who says, I want it? No. But what its meaning is, because it's talking about life in the kingdom, and it's talking about the effects of sin, bad attitudes on our lives. And it's the same thing is where he said, better to have a hand cut off than than have two hands and let the effect of that affect you. Or an eye, better to have one eye removed or a foot cut off. No, he wasn't saying that we should go around and remove our eyes. What he was saying was, and in the same thing about turning the other cheek, about giving your coat, going the extra mile, was about if you have an attitude in your heart that's resentful, bitter, and angry or frustrated towards a person or a situation, it's better that you let them hit you on the other cheek than have that attitude, which is going to destroy your life. You know, a red cheek is nothing compared to a destroyed life caused by bitterness or unforgiveness. So that's really what it was trying to say. Better you give someone a coat than you hold unforgiveness to that person, and that will destroy you. Where a coat you can get and replace. You know, so it's about the attitude of our heart, not about we have to give a coat or let someone hit us, because we don't. But better you do if you have a wrong attitude towards that person and you cannot love them, which means if someone strikes you on the cheek, Jesus said we have to forgive them, and not just forgive them, we have to bless them. And if our attitude is such of when someone does something negatively to us, whatever it might be, is that we're holding it against them, that is not a good place to be in. And it would be better to, you know, let them hit us again than hold what they did last time against us. Yeah, and that, I think, is what those parables were talking about. That's what the parable of, you know, not having your hand cut off, whatever. It's better to operate in the kingdom with one hand than operate with unforgiveness and wrong attitudes and those type of things. It's the life of the kingdom which demonstrates the love of God, which if we live will bring us blessing. We live in the blessing. And Jesus spoke a lot of those parables to the religious people of the day who were self-righteous, and he was challenging their self-righteousness and the law as being enough to save them, and that they were Abraham's children. And what did he call them? You know, children of Gehenna, children of the sewer, you know, of your father the devil. Now that was hugely insulting to the Pharisees and Sadducees and the whole lot of them. I mean, hugely insulting. And they knew it, and they knew what he was saying to them. But they steadfastly refused to believe and changed their heart. Instead, they tried to kill him because they were so offended that he had pointed out their self-righteousness. Because to a Pharisee, outward appearance was everything. You know, they wanted everyone to see how good they were. And like Paul described, you know, a Pharisee of Pharisees, you know, a Hebrew of Hebrews, who kept every letter of the law, so much so that he was willing to go and persecute and kill Christians on the basis of his beliefs. You know, you couldn't get anything. And yet, what does he say? I class it all as basically dung in comparison with the riches of knowing Christ. You know, and I think that's a lot of what the parables were about in that way. And I think if we understand that, then we are not operating out of the wrong belief systems that we can operate in. And therefore, when we make judgment, we have to do it in love. And we have to do it the same way Jesus makes a judgment, or God makes a judgment. It's made on the basis of the cross, on that everything has already been accounted for. And so judgments on our, you know, that's why we get not guilty verdicts when we go to the court, because we're standing clothed in the robes of righteousness given because of what Jesus did, not because we can stand there and defend ourselves. And we can't judge or make judgments based on human reasoning or human understanding. It must flow out of love. And that's why we need desperately to encounter the love of God in such a way that it transforms our identity and brings us into the fullness of knowing that we're accepted, we're loved, we're within, you know, that nobility, that royal priesthood, part of God's family, adopted. You know, we can cry out, Abba, Father, Daddy. You know, no one called God Father in the Old Testament. Every occurrence of Father, I think there's 15 occurrences of Father in the Old Testament, and none of them are relating to anyone personally addressing God. It can be that God is the Father of creation, the Father of mankind, that type of thing, but no one addressed him until Jesus comes along, and he continually addressed him, particularly in John's Gospel, as Father, over and over and over again. And that was a totally transforming revelation that they didn't have before Jesus came onto the scene. And Jesus comes and he totally transforms their rabbinical traditions, their understanding, their beliefs, challenges their attitudes, and completely reconfigures everything. Now he's saying, yeah, I'm in the Father and the Father's in me, and the Father's going to come in you, and we're going to be together, and we're going to be in this amazing relationship, you know, and you're going to be my sons and brothers and all that amazing stuff, that thing. And then the Father, you know, sends the Holy Spirit out to affirm that in us and to fill us with that love and fill us with the truth and bring us into all truth. Oh, it's amazing, you know, but we've got to experience it. It can't be theoretical, and we can't judge without it, you know, because we will judge out of our own understanding, and that will not be good. You know, there are ways that seem right unto a man, the ends thereof are the ways of death. No matter what we do from the DIY tree, it is going to lead to death, of one description or another. A death of a relationship, a death spiritually, a death in so many different ways of describing how death will outwork from the DIY tree. You know, but it will. And so love is, you know, absolutely paramount in our relationship with God, and then everything we do flowing out of love, flowing from that place, when we will be able to make verdicts based on love. And what will those verdicts be? The same verdict that God gives us. Not guilty, you can be free. You know, yeah, and all those things, you know. So yeah, but it's an amazing thing that God's opening up for us in these days. I mean, to come deeper and deeper and deeper into his love. I mean, to experience the height and depth and breadth and width, you know, and the multi-dimensions of his love, you know, and nothing can separate us from that love. You know, we need to actually live in it, you know, never being separated from it, never thinking separation thoughts, because as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. And if we think separation, we will live separated. And immediately when we do something which we think will be offensive to God, if we think separation, then we will hide in the bushes. And we don't need to hide. We run to him, and in being embraced by the Father's embrace, he gives us robes of righteousness. You know, and I think that whole way of living is so important, that we don't get deceived into thinking that we're separated. And if we do something that God turns away and can't look at us, or turns his back, he never stops looking at us. If he did, we wouldn't exist. He just wants us to look at him with no barriers, with no guilt, no shame, no condemnation. You know, yeah, we can ask for forgiveness and be cleansed from all unrighteousness, but our focus isn't on how God views us negatively, and therefore we feel separated or isolated. And I'm not saying we should dismiss sin or minimize it. There are consequences for behaviors that I don't want to suffer, you know, but I know one of those consequences is not that God stops loving me or has bad thoughts to me or has something bad to do, you know, in me or to me. It isn't that at all. You know, the consequence of sin is self-inflicted. It isn't God-inflicted. And God does not want us to suffer from self-inflicted things. So he wants to continually bring us into a place of restoration and love and peace and grace and mercy and all the wonderful attributes that God has in his wonderful relationship with us. So there we go. Anyway. Okay. All right. Well, I better leave